David Bohm Seminar, Saturday, March 21st, 1992, 4 o'clock afternoon session, Oak Grove School, Ojai, California.
Yes, well, this morning I think we went very fast, and we usually, as I said, get there much later. The question is, what to do. Now, I think maybe we should try to go a little slower. I mean, perhaps go over it a bit, and then go on. Now, just to review, I think that we could understand the basic trouble with thought, as arising from the fact that memory, responsive memory, is rather arbitrary. You see, we could say all the natural functions of the brain, let's say the emotional function, intellectual function, and the connection between them across that bundle of nerves are in order, as are other functions, basically, unless something is wrong with the brain. But the accumulation of strong memories, memory includes not just the picture, but all the reactions, and it might even include it includes the chemistry of the brain and the nervous system, or even apparently allergies, the ability to produce allergies. We were talking this morning, there are people with multiple personalities, and one personality has allergies and the other doesn't. So it must be on the memory, the distinction. It's like two programs, one an allergy program and the other free of it. They might be rather, I suppose, a computer, I don't know how they work exactly, but a computer, they could be more or less on the same disk, even though they produce such different functions, you see. So, personality. So, the memory connects up everything. You see, the physical, the chemical, the body. Also, the memory of muscular action. See, some of the memory is, as it were, in the muscles, but it may not be entirely in the brain. It may be the rest of the nervous system. And these memories will all be able to associate, you see, producing conditioning. See, the memories are actually reflexes. Right? Even the memory of a picture is a reflex enabling the brain to produce a picture. And exactly as in the computer, the memory is a kind of reflex that when something happens, then a certain memory comes up and acts, right? And then it may act on something else, and so on. So, I better take off this coat. It's getting warm. I'll put it here. Now, as strong memories accumulate with powerful reflexes, these may start to interfere with the natural functions of the system. Now, they jump up and they're not really necessarily in order, right, for the rest of the system. And they can upset it and so on. And I think you could look at it that way, that say you get a thought which will stir up a memory and associate to a feeling. The feeling suddenly comes up. It may have nothing to do with anything, but it just comes up, right? Or some muscular tension, or a state of the stomach, or even and sensitivity to allergic sensitivity, or asthma, or something. And so we could say that the more civilization develops, I think, the more it tends to build up such powerful memories. I mean, we need them for many purposes, and then many of them are. Memory in general is limited. You see, I've said it might have been appropriate. At best, it might have been appropriate. In some situations, it would continue, but it will be limited. It is not always adequate. In fact, generally, for something new, it is not. And the reflex may contain a memory of necessity and the urge or the drive to go on with it, and so on. And the whole thing goes on. So. And then we get bombarded now with not only books, but newspapers, but television and radio and so on, other forms of information, which many of them are connected with powerful images and emotions, and they produce reflexes. The advertising is based on that they are not attempting usually to make a rational argument to get you to buy their product, but rather they don't care very much what they say as long as the thing is impressed in your mind and the memory, so that when you see the product, there will be it will come up. You'll pay attention to it, perhaps want to buy it. You see, many of the scenes which build it up are absurd, or some of them are unconnected with the thing. In other cases, they're connected. In the case of trying to arouse emotions, like showing a picture of a car and the pleasure the person has in driving it, how nice it is, and so on. And that will all come up by association, hoping that will make you buy the car. Apparently, it works sufficiently often so that people feel it's worth advertising in that way. Now, and you could say that these memories eventually accumulate as a kind of electrochemical pollution, you see, of the whole system, the brain and nervous system. Just as various chemicals accumulate byproducts of what has been done in industry, and these accumulate, and and then they get in the way. You see, now some people here I see have felt they could live in the wilderness and be avoiding some of this and let the brain quiet down. Doubtless, if we could live there, it would be quite a bit better. But even there, people, even in earlier times, people have had trouble. You see, there are memories of death and memories of people form the memories of their ancestors and memories of enmity with another tribe and so on. So it was probably easier then, but it still had some problems in it. But they were not so serious as the problems we have today. So I think that's one point, that if you can see, we've said that thought produces a result and then says it didn't do it, but what actually happens is thought stirs up another reflex of memory. It doesn't know that has happened, and that thing seems to come out independent of thought, right? And the thought that went in. The thought goes in, the thought comes out, or it may have only, what comes out may apparently not be thought, but be muscular tension or feelings or whatever. I don't know if that will help to say that that's where the trouble is, really, I think, with the thought process. That really, the brain has not been set up to handle a large amount of thought. If we're going to do it, then we're going to have to pay a lot of attention to it. Now, and then the question we'll have to discuss, how we, it's hard to say how we manage to pay attention to this process of reflex of memory.
I don't quite get the point when you say the brain is not set up to handle a lot of thought.
Well, it's not set up spontaneously. You see, I think that a certain amount of thought, it's like a certain amount of pollution will not cause any trouble. As you get more, it causes trouble. Now, if we carry out thought without any understanding of what's happening, it will build up a lot of pollution, and the brain wasn't set to handle that, right? If you see what I mean.
Thought gone wrong, then, not necessarily sheer volume of...
No, but it can't handle a lot of... But when thought began, there was very little understanding of what was going on. It was bound to that was bound to happen, right? Although perhaps they had more insight then than we have today, for all I know. But even then, it was not enough, right? As we can see by the fact that what happened. So I'm saying that thought, if thought is perfectly orderly and rational, even then it's going to establish, associations which work automatically. So it's going to require attention, because none of these rational thoughts have unlimited validity. Some of them may be quite general. For example, in science, you may have a thought which holds a long way, a system of thought, but it doesn't hold all the way. And people had the faith, in the 19th century, had the faith that it would hold forever. You see, this basic system of thought, physics, classical physics. And Lord Kelvin, one of the leading theoretical physicists of the time, said, advised young people not to go into physics as it was only a matter of the next decimal point, refinements in the next decimal point. And not long after he made this, we had the revolutions of relativity and quantum theory. And now some people today are talking about the theory of everything, which is a very similar idea. They're saying physics is going to finish, and the study of the foundations of nature is going to finish. And we will basically know, not all the detail, but we'll have to work out tremendous amounts, but we'll know basically the outline of everything, right? Now, you see, there seems to be some tendency in thought to say that, and therefore we will tend to get stuck on that line of thought. Now, in science, there's a way out of it because you find contradictions, but people have to be ready to acknowledge them. They say, whenever there's a contradiction, it could always be accommodated within the existing system, you see. That's clear, isn't it? You can always invent a more complicated theory that would fit it. As when they had, the ancient Greeks had the thought of, the world was 7 crystal spheres, the sphere being the most perfect of figures, the circle, and heavenly matter should move in perfect circles. Earthly matter might move in complicated ways because it's highly imperfect. And that could be taken as a hypothesis, which you could explore, you see. But then people found the circles were not perfect. They made circles, epicycles, circles on top of circles, and it was possible then to accommodate that. And in fact, it was very practical because it's a very convenient way of calculating these orbits, and it worked very nicely for many purposes. So it was only later, after the Middle Ages, that people began to discover things and think differently. That is, they found that the astronomical situation was not so different from what it is on the Earth. At one stage, Copernicus proposed that the whole thing could be explained by saying that instead of saying the sun goes around the Earth, by saying the Earth goes around the sun. Now that was already an overturn. It was a kind of insight. And more and more evidence accumulated. You see, when the telescope came, you found that the other planets had satellites, and you could see that the surface of the moon was highly irregular, was highly imperfect. Many other things, and Kepler proposed the orbit was an ellipse, not a perfect circle. And many other things accumulated, saying that heavenly matter and earthly matter are not so different. So there was the fundamental assumption before that they were very different. One would go in perfect circles and the other not. Now, you see the tendency of thought to adapt so as to hold on, which is not entirely wrong because you don't want to just give up your ideas for trivial reasons. But it's a matter of the right, that it's carried too far, this holding on, right? And so and then you have various insights which suggest the overturn of previous ideas. And see, these insights really refer to fundamental differences or similarities. That, see, if you say there's a fundamental difference of earthly and heavenly matter, you had one approach of saying they're not different, but the fundamental differences were only in the motions of the orbits. And the theory of evolution, who said there was no fundamental difference between the human species and the others, at least as far as biology is concerned. That the human species could evolve out of other species. And that enabled one to order thought in a very different way. But you see, there's a very strong tendency to hold on because there was a great deal of emotional significance in the old way. People had got used to it. It seemed to provide a solid foundation. And to a certain extent, some people felt very bad about saying that they were not very different from other animals. And people still had a sort of a feeling that this couldn't be entirely right, which may have something in it. But I think that what it suggests is that we should look at all these ideas as assumptions or hypotheses, provisional, which are being tested and which hold up to a point. After a while, you have confidence in them and accept them. And then later, you're open, ready to question them. Well, this idea has fairly well taken hold of in science, but then it doesn't, although scientists are not always able to do it. But in other areas of life, it doesn't work. Say in politics or religion. So, you can see why it doesn't work. That the self is involved. Even in science, the self will be involved, and you like the theory, it's your theory, but it was able, see, this was a discovery. Science was not only the fact that you had a combination of theory and experiment and testing, but also the readiness to question hypotheses, or to become aware of them. See, many of these hypotheses are often not even stated. They're implicit assumptions. And then you get an insight which enables you to explore overturning them or changing them. If this happens in a wide variety of areas, then people of science, people call this a change of paradigm. But that has been a term which has been used a great deal. Right, so what's suggested is that thought has to be looked at as to some extent provisional, incomplete, provisional. Even the best thought is that nature. And therefore assumptions that some thought is always true or absolutely necessary are questionable. And it's those assumptions which are causing the trouble. Now, those will be made about everything which we think is really very important. Now, I think I just want to call attention there to that thought has to be carried out in a proper form, and thought is very subtle. Things which we think are not thought are often thought, as we've discussed already. And see, because the memory comes up and infuses perception to give shape to perception, or as well as other reflexes. Right. Well, I think really I wanted to just call attention to this feature of thought, and perhaps we could now go on to discuss either this or anything else.
Are you kind of suggesting that we need a paradigm shift with respect to our understanding of thought?
Well, the word paradigm has been used in that sense. It would be a paradigm shift, if you want to call it that. I'm not entirely favorable to that use of the word. A paradigm should mean a typical or characteristic example, but it has come to mean something more in the way people use it in the history of science.
Suggestive of a singularity in the lensing, still, from this paradigm to another, it still has that.
What?
The idea of a paradigm still seems to be, there's an A, there's a one, there's a
Yeah.
singularity about it, which is
Yeah.
inherently contradictory to what we're trying to explore.
Yes, well, the paradigm has the notion of, first of all, it holds in some area, and this would hold, see, the memory holds in every area, and therefore, in that sense, it's different from a paradigm. But you can make some comparison anyway, so to say there's some similarity. We've been used to thinking of, we haven't given, we've seen memory, we've usually given a much more secondary role. We haven't been used to regarding memory as having this rather pervasive effect. And
is this the pollution upstream that you refer to? The combination of memory and our memories or thoughts of self?
well, the thought is based on memory. You see, the memory creates a tendency to respond in a certain way, to give rise to a thought or a feeling or a movement or something. See, I'm suggesting that we put all this together as memory, as thought, call it thought rather than just memory. It's the responsive memory.
It's the tendency of thought to think in absolutes or in some kind of unmovable, that doesn't want to move, that it's its problem. If memory and thought were just this flowing movement of information coming out, being valued and correlated and stuff, but it has that feature of being unmovable.
Yes, and
absolute.
you can see that in several sides. Right? See, one side is the actual content of thought, the memory of what is necessary. Well, if it's something is necessary, then it's necessary to keep on thinking that it's necessary, right? And but necessary means logically it cannot be otherwise, but it also means necessi, don't yield. Which is an attitude which goes beyond the intellect, right?
Like our brains seem much more related. You talked about these scientists and their discovery, like was it Copernicus that discovered that and the church comes and says, well, either you say what you discovered isn't true, or we're going to kill you. No problem.
Yes, but because of the absolute necessity of the doctrines of the church, if there was a feeling that they happened to interweave the doctrines of the church, I don't remember how, with the cosmology.
We're much more like the people who are the doctrinaires in our head than we are like the people who would discover a new way. We have a tremendous doctrinal basis.
Yeah, well, the doctrine of the self, you see. I mean, any new thought which challenges that there'll be a tendency to resist it, you see. And it's always possible to adapt older ideas, apparently, to make it fit, you see. Almost always, anyway.
Could we flesh out in more detail what is the doctrine of the self?
Right. Well, I mean, what we were like discussing this morning, wasn't it?
But it's much more than just the fact that it exists. It's a matter of including a lot of qualities as well.
Oh, yeah. But if Descartes said, I think, therefore I am, which really made thought the essential center of the self. You see, not somebody could also say, I believe, therefore I am, or I feel, therefore I am, or I do this, therefore I am. I mean, many, many ways by which a person could identify himself. And you see, all these ways of identifying create something beyond although they may take place apparently in the intellect, they create a movement of necessity beyond the intellect, right? As well as intensity and importance and value, you see. You see, the word value is the same root as valor and valiant. It means strength, and something which has high value, it means there's something strong reaction to it. But see, people may have sensed value first as just their strong response. Later we put it in words, and now the words going onto the memory can produce that response, right? So all of that, see, there's this division between the intellect and the other things doesn't hold. I mean, not merely because they are connected in their correct function, but also because they're connected in a rather messy way in memory.
The doctrine of the self might include the doctrine that some selves are more important than other selves.
Now, eventually, yes. Yes, I mean, well, for example, it may have been that the king originally, or the aristocracy, the nobles, were the only ones who had any value. And see, at one stage, people were saying animals had no souls. You see, the soul is closely connected with that idea, the immortal soul, which really must have tremendous value if it's immortal. Anything immortal would have great value, right? Anything eternal. And that's why diamonds have great value.
Is that an older version of the modern necessary self, would you think?
What?
The idea of the eternal soul, which is an old-fashioned sort of notion, maybe.
Yeah, well, that was one way to ground it, saying it's eternal. You see,
How we say the self is number one.
the self is we're not able with confidence to say the self is eternal. You see, that would give it a much higher value.
I'm just wondering, that's just not the modern version, that maybe the importance of the self is slipping slightly in this.
No, but it comes in other ways. I wouldn't. You see, that is in the older days, the king obviously was an was an unrestricted ego, right? You know, you say, I'm the King of Kings, the Great One, and you know, my reign will last, will be significant forever, and so on. And it was important here that different kings, you know, that they, not merely for practical purposes, but also for the sake of this identification, to say which one has the highest value. And of course they said the gods had still higher value, and eventually the one God had supreme value. But it didn't really prevent the ego from getting supreme value too.
Well, some of the roots of that in Greek culture are that what has greatest value is your honor, which is how you appear to other people.
Yeah.
So you, the so-called you, and how it's seen by so-called others, it is of supreme value. And I think we've inherited that to some extent.
Yes, it happens quite a bit. I mean, that the way you appear in the eyes of others gives you your sense of identity and value. And without that, you may feel you haven't got it anywhere. Or nothing that counts. Right?
Could we sort of look at perhaps what the relationship is between the structure of thought, the movement of thought, and the self? For example, the statement you just made with respect to how man was perceived at one point or another, a king might be perceived, that was still a function of thought,
Yes.
which caused that to come about. So there was a relationship, evidently, between thought, the movement of thought, the process of thought, and the development of the self.
Yes, well, that's rather hard to see. I mean, and maybe we're trying to jump in at the deep end.
Doesn't it have to do with the idea that the self is the thinker?
Yes, I mean, and not only the self is the thinker, but as Descartes said, the self as thinker is the essential element of the thinker is the essential element of the essence, right? I don't know if I say the quintessence.
So then the part of the essence of the process of thought is to impose itself or to create itself in some form that suggests that there is a thinker in thought.
Yes, but I mean, in the past, though, you see, you could have said the warrior, the king, you know, is the highest.
But that was thought saying
It was still thought saying it, yes. I mean, in Descartes, it came out in the purest form in the sense that it said, frankly said, thought is the highest. Right?
But this morning you were suggesting that thought precedes self.
Well, yeah, this is a difficult question. I would say I don't think we should prejudge the issue about whether there is a self or not. There's, in some sense, we exist, or it might. You see, there wasn't. The trouble is with the notion of identity, with saying that is what we are. See, if we say that is what we are, then we've got to be, has to be necessary. That takes supreme value, right? Because the self being the center, the essence of not merely your existence, but in the experience of the very young child of all existence.
Identity means that which is always the same.
Yes.
That's the same root, isn't it, as idea?
Does it?
I think it was. Very
I've forgotten what the root of idea is.
Edom, I think. I'm not certain of that. Classical scholars.
Yes, I'm not certain. I mean, I've forgotten that. I mean, I thought it might have to do with eidos or an image. But
well, either has to do with seeing.
Seeing, yeah.
Either is seeing, is a word.
Yeah.
What?
Either. The word plus either is the past participle.
Okay. What has been seen.
Yeah.
Well, that makes it right. You see, just as we would say thought is the past participle of thinking, eidos is the past participle of seeing, right? It's the memory of seeing.
Socrates
So idea is that. Idea is something which has been seen and has been formulated.
Yes, and which still acts and so on.
And maybe it had just been distorted too.
Well, it will be distorted if you give it the value of seeing.
Right.
You see, if you the same is true of intellect, the past participle of intelligere.
You mentioned the word aletheia this morning, and that if you look at the root of that in Greek, it's alethos, which means not stone.
Not what?
Not stone. Lithos is stone. Alethos means not.
Yeah, that would mean say not lethargic.
Not rigid.
Not rigid. Oh, not rigid. Yes.
Rigid, yes.
Oh, I see. That's good. Yes.
Yeah.
That means sort of subtle and flexible.
Yes.
Why do you say playful?
Playful.
The playful.
Yeah.
Alethos anthropos would mean a man who is not rigid, and in Greek culture, to be that is.
Well, power is the one who is operated with intelligent thought and not the rigid thought.
It's an
Yes.
interesting word.
Yes.
Because out of that also comes truth, the word truth.
Yeah. The Greek word for truth is not rigid. Yes.
Right.
It means open.
Playful. I've heard it translated as playful. I don't know if that's accurate, but I've read that somewhere.
Well, playful is non-rigid too.
Yeah.
Well, playful is joyful too.
Is what?
It brings joy. Does not
Yeah.
bring the pain of rigidity.
Well, then can we go one step back?
Yeah.
And rather than talk about the self, talk about thought and what is a thought? So I say it when thought sees something. Can thought see something? I know we talked about the process of thought as opposed to thought itself and the content of thought, but what is thought?
Yes. Well, yeah, it is a process, as you said, and I think we should perhaps try to go into it. It's a process based on memory, and producing imitations of things which have been seen or experienced, or something similar to it, but obviously abstractions. And see, thought contains representations. You see, that is, there has been what is present, and it may be present again in thought. And see, in that sense, of course, say the artist picture can be a representation, or the camera picture, or the map, the diagram, the verbal description. They all constitute representations, which are, the fact that they are abstractions is what makes them possibly useful, because they will represent some limited area which may be of significance for the moment. And and then there's also the symbol, which stands in either for the object or for the representation. The symbol, I think its root in Greek would be to throw it together, right? It brings things together. And now the symbol is very powerful insofar, because it's so open, it's so undetermined, you see, that the symbol doesn't necessarily stand for only one object, it stands for whole classes of objects, which may be different. And it's always open to add different things to the meaning of the symbol according to the new context, right? So the symbol is what allows thought to take logical form and to go to much higher levels of abstraction in the representation.
We're talking about thought and not thinking, is that right? I mean,
Well,
we're talking about material that's been recorded in the brain and can be recalled.
Yes, well, we're talking about how it functions, though. See, the symbol can be taken as a thought, or it could be taken as a function of the process to symbolize, to use symbols. Right?
Would you expand a little on that statement that thought is pollution, or like pollution?
Well, not all thought, I'm saying, but certain kinds of thought, right, which are rather most common in most societies. But well, you see, you've had all sorts of experiences and words and talk and conclusions and what's necessary, what's great, you've had, some of the experiences have been painful, some have been pleasurable, some have had fear and some have had security. And this all comes up again in a similar but different form out of memory. It operates the function. And the important thing to remember is that the memory operates the function. It's not just a sort of sitting there.
Our residue.
Yes, it operates the function as the computer operates the function. It doesn't just give a record. A record is only one, a visible record is only one function that could be made, right?
You mean if I remember I was afraid yesterday, I start to tell myself the same story that I can produce fear in the body? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, if you remember something that made you have fear, you'll produce fear, or remembering something similar, or it appears to be similar.
The whole style of acting.
What?
There's a whole style of acting.
Yeah.
But that when the body reacts to the image that way, as though it were real.
Yes.
How do you disconnect? How does one perceive the image for what it is and not as in reality?
Yeah, well, we were discussing if you know that it's thinking, then you do perceive it. Let's say the actor, as you were remarking, is doing the same thing. I mean, he, in a way, is reliving the experience. He's not just sort of abstractly repeating it. But
then it's a difficult thing because visualization techniques in healing would seem to work very effectively in many illnesses.
Well,
we know we're thinking, we know we're creating these visualizations.
Yes.
And yet the body doesn't know that we're creating them. The body takes them to be real.
Yes, I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, I'm trying to say that if we never keep track of the fact that it's a memory, then we're going to be in trouble. I mean, you're aware of what you're doing. You're saying this is a responsive memory which produces in the body something similar to what might be produced by a healing impulse.
We're not doing that all the time.
Well, we may be doing it all the time. You see, but the placebo effect some doctors have said it may be one of the most important things.
But instead of imposing the thought pictures for healing, why are you going to help the healing powers of the body to come out?
Well,
which is more natural.
Yeah, we can do that, but I'm saying if people do that, they're trying to do that with the thought pictures to create a situation in the body which is favorable to healing, you see. In some cases it works. You see, the placebo effect actually works in many cases, but you can't depend on it. And in many cases it won't work, obviously.
The anxiety in some and the anxiety is the pollutant.
Yeah. Now, if you're sort of aware you're doing it, you see, but you may be engaging in the placebo effect in something you're doing, which is actually dangerous or actually harmful, and you feel it's not, right? So it can lead you astray. The placebo effect could lead you astray. Perhaps you need an operation, and you say you don't, right?
We're talking about this new brain being able to abstract in many different ways and having an effect on the old brain and the body, as if the old brain and the body have no real way of telling if the information coming in is real or not. And so, I mean, because it came into being saying all information was real. And now this abstract brain that we've somehow been imbued with is able to stir up all of the old mechanisms as if something real was happening. There's a part that doesn't know that it's not real. How could it never had any need to know what wasn't real?
Yeah, but it's got to do it to some extent in order to carry out useful tasks and technology and so on.
It's sort of like the way it's used in this problematical, it's almost like a drug to the body.
Well, it can become that. You see that, in fact, in order to be able to use thought, that you have to do this. So in learning to drive a car, you may be told all sorts of things, and you turn them into reflexes, and then the reflexes operate, and you perceive in terms of the reflex. You say it's like red light means stop, but it doesn't mean you think it means stop, but it means stop, that you actually stop. Now you have to have those reflexes working in order to do that thing.
Is that why you can drive and be thinking of something else?
Yes, you see, you're depending on the reflexes to keep you going. And in most cases, they'll be all right. And you see, and if you're somewhat alert, then you can see when they're not working. See, so every skill depends on something like that too, doesn't it? You know, it's what Polanyi called tacit knowledge.
Maybe is it possible that the way we live our lives in society is an extension of that many of the things that we do?
Yes, it certainly isn't, but some of that is necessary.
Sure.
And now, in a certain way, it leads to incoherence. Now the real issue is this: when it leads to incoherence, what is our attitude? That is, what is our disposition? You see, if the attitude or disposition is to notice the incoherence and begin to learn about it.
Well, if I understand correctly, according to the doctrine of the self,
yeah,
when there is incoherence, the attitude is, there must be something mistaken outside. Certainly, there's nothing within which is generating this incoherence.
Yes, or it can be the other way around. People who can begin to lose confidence and say that it's all due to me, right? They blame themselves for everything.
That's the counter doctrine of the self.
No, but every religion generates its counter, right? I mean, Catholicism generated Protestantism and the Counter-Reformation, right? And that came later. Again.
The anti-self.
You see that people perceive that something is going wrong with this, and they take the opposite. Right? You see, that again is crude thought. I mean, say either that's absolute, it's either something or the opposite.
It's a curious thing with that feeling of a negative feeling toward the self or the counter self or whatever. That if what you were saying earlier about this feeling of fictitious being is necessary and built into the self, it's no different whether it's a positive feeling for the self or whether it's a negative feeling. Yeah. They both generate the same ultimate effect of feeling something other than genuine being or genuine existence.
Yeah, they generate a feeling which really comes out of memory, but which purports to be a direct feeling. Like saying you could get a direct feeling of hunger showing that you were hungry, or you could get a feeling of emptiness which is interpreted as hunger and making you eat, right? And then you're not satisfied.
In either case, what you have in common is the self is of central importance. Either it's impeccable and couldn't be wrong, or it's the source of all difficulty.
Yeah, well, it comes to the same thing, because that comes to saying that everything depends on me. Mm-hmm. See, a person who is ready to be very guilty. Right. Also, the self is highly unusual in some respect. You see, it's unusually guilty, or unusually good, or unusual, or exceptional. Or mediocre, exceptionally mediocre. Then people may take pride in their, being the ordinary average person, right?
But it's exceptional.
But still the center. Still the center of the universe.
Yeah.
No matter what we say, we always seem coming back to this sort of a vortex of energy between thought and memory and conditioning and all of these impulses that keep rolling around the same center or the same space and creating this feeling that there's something in that space.
Yes, and you see, the notion of the center and the periphery is a basic notion of thought. Right? Saying that, that's a basic order which is set up, our structure and our thinking all around. And it can be illustrated by a circle or by a sense of a center from which something is radiating in a periphery. You see, now that is a representation, you see, of a certain order. And remember how these representations work, that the representation can be easily experienced as a direct perception. You see, in the case of a picture, it's close. But see, one of the favorite ones is the rainbow. You see, now the rainbow is sensed as an object, all these colors out there somewhere. But if you walk toward the chair, which is represented in your mind in a certain way, you will eventually meet the chair. But if you walk toward the rainbow, you won't. Now, because the rainbow is not such an object, according to physics, it's the rain is falling, the raindrops are refracting light and to each point in this pattern of an arc, you see, and of different colors. And now that pattern can be taken as a representation of an object. If the person doesn't know, or may not know, or not be thinking that it's due to some other process, you see. So in some way, the rainbow and the process behind it, it's a somewhat similar relation of the content of thought and the process behind it. So all the different representations, such as the center and the periphery, can be experienced as being there, right? Being perceived. And also the solidity of things can be produced artificially too, you see, from memory. Right? In the sense, one expects the chair to be solid. Now it may not be, but you're disposed as if it were solid, right? Or, you see, if you see an escalator going, you're disposed as if it were moving. Now if it stopped, it's rather hard to see that it has stopped, you see. So you may feel your body is already disposed to the moving escalator, even though you know it has stopped. Huh?
Part of this vortex of energy is resistance. And it's one of the reasons it doesn't want to change, because if it can resist, it must exist. Anything that can resist, resistance is
well, resistance is part of reality. That anything which is real will resist up to us.
It can imply or prove its existence is to resist change.
Yes, that be stable. You see, otherwise it doesn't exist if it has no stability. The other way is to be a source of action and energy. Right?
Why does this thing resist change? Because it has to prove it exists at all costs, and one of the ways to do it is to resist new information and resist change.
Yeah.
That's how it gets.
The other way is to feel it as a sense of power and giving it a sense of reality.
Can you say that any strongly held concepts of self prevent actual contact with reality in the same way as any concept of truth prevents contact with truth?
Yeah. Yes, the concept of truth or reality, see, as we say, truth must be not rigid. And also, if there is a self, it should not be rigid. Right? That, you see, there was an ancient notion that the self is unknown. It's constantly revealing itself, but it's unknown, right? What it is. Right? Now, on the other hand, the notion of identity suggests that the self is known, right?
You almost say that any strongly held concept would shut off contact.
Well, it will tend to stand out, right? It will tend to seem to be independent. If something shines out much stronger in the background, and it seems to stand by itself, right?
Well, if I hold the strongly held concept that this is a chair, and the strongly held means there's an absoluteness about it, I can't also see that this is not a chair.
Yes.
So the strongly held concept, wherever it moves, leads to a disorder.
That's right. Now, you see, the things that make strongly held concepts are, we say notion of religion of what is God, the notion of universal truths in science or elsewhere, and the notion of the self, which would be the quintessence. See, which it's experienced as the quintessence of all. Right? See, since this center is the center of the whole field of perception, therefore, at the level of immediate experience, what it means is that's the center of everything. If that goes, everything goes. Right? See, in an abstract sense, you could say it will still be there, but at a lower, more concrete level, there's the feeling that if that goes, the bottom goes, and everything goes. And see, also, the ground of the self might be felt to be in the solar plexus. And if that sinking sensation there, it seems that everything is sinking. Everything goes. See, also the ground of the self might be felt to be in the solar plexus. And if that sinking sensation there, it seems that everything is sinking.
So I think I can sense notion of movement coming in again, the importance of movement rather than fixity or rigidity, that being is becoming. Being is becoming. The movement, the flow of meaning rather than put into a rigid structure.
Yes. Well, the actual movement of thought, of memory, responding, would have to be like the movement of a stream, and the forms which appear on the stream are relatively stable, like a vortex, and there may be a pattern of vortices. But the suggestion is that the self, as we experience it, is more like these vortices than it is like a permanent, stable object.
If we were to pick up on what Anna just said regarding being and becoming, I know you have more than mentioned the fact this aspect of becoming is a very basic aspect of what is. And when you look at the me, the I, it gives the illusion of being.
That's right, yes.
But in fact, it's not.
Yeah, so from the memory, an illusion of becoming is created. Now you see, we can create illusions of becoming, like say with the cine camera, because or the television camera for that matter, that the images are really discrete images, and one follows the other very shortly. Now, if a number of images are experienced all together in different stages of development, you get a sense of becoming, of movement, you see. Now, if the images are sensed far apart, say half a second apart, you don't get that. So you can create the illusion of becoming, namely the forms which appear on the screen appear to be in the movement of becoming.
That's a trap.
Yeah, that also gives a greater sense of reality, doesn't it? As the static image is not sensed as so real.
Well, that's what we call time. We experience that as time, right? Now, we also experience time as trees growing and moving and the sun coming up and the sun going down. And then there's this other kind of time of me in perpetuity.
Mm-hmm.
And then they seem to get mixed up too.
That's the illusion part.
Yeah, so there is an actual process of becoming that underlies the me, but it isn't the process that we experience as the me, becoming. So when I say I'm going to become stronger or better, then there's a sort of an image, almost like a cine image, of becoming better, you see. It sort of starts to become better, and then it slips back and goes again, and so on. Do you see what I mean?
Is part of the problem that memory, the difficulty with memory in terms of it being a pollution is that it doesn't, or this me that we're talking about, the identification with an image, is that we're not nourished in the sense of becoming more. We're not becoming more awake as it automates, as it runs the functions, the program, in the sense that it's kind of like it's kind of runaway waste. There's no waste management. We don't know how to remove ourselves from the waste, all this residue of thought.
But this thought is not the image. See, the content of thought is not becoming anything, but the becoming is at another level.
Yeah, so the question is that couldn't even memory, I'm not sure that memory is the problem as much as identifying with the images of memory, in the sense that even memory, it seems, can revivify or awaken another kind of attention.
Well, no, memory is not necessarily a problem. It's a certain confusion, so that the response of memory is confused with an independent reality, independent of thought, right? You see, and then that leads to a wrong response in the next thought. treating it as an independent reality. So thought is apparently creating something which is a problem, and then it treats it as an independent problem, and then tries to solve it. See, that's what's happening all the time in politics. The ecological problem is created entirely by thought. You see, by itself it would not be a problem. Now, but then when we catch up with it, we say that's an external problem. Well, really what it means is we've got to change ourselves to do something to, you see, otherwise it means you keep on doing it and then you try somehow to overcome it.
What does it mean to change ourselves?
Well, in order to stop destroying the environment, or we would call it the environment.
What does it mean to change ourselves?
Yeah, well, I'm just saying, I don't know. I'm saying that it is we who have to change if this problem is to be solved. Right?
You have to change the values, is that what you're saying?
Well, the values have to change, and also, but fundamentally, it's this this confusion in thought. You see that the memory comes up and produces a response, and the next thought recognizes that as not thought, but something objective, something independent. Right?
Attribution process.
Yes. Now, attribution is the same as representation can produce that sense of reality. So attribution produces it too. You see, saying that that is the sound is coming from the image. Or if you attribute some racial qualities, you actually apparently perceive those qualities. And see, the thing is that memory can sort of imitate almost any function you care to mention. And it's very hard to, it can easily be lost, lose track of the fact that memory is doing that. Because thought is not intelligent. It just responds, and it may respond just to the next, to that thought, to that apparent perception as if it were independent reality.
Virtual reality.
Yeah. Yes, well, we know we have this virtual reality which people are producing. Well, I think all of our reality is experienced as virtual, but we have to test for whether... See, I think we should say something about this. That it's practically certain that the brain constructs the sense of reality, which we have, and very often quite wrongly. You know, that's what we call illusion, but which looks quite solid and real when it's there. And the brain is constructing it by attribution, by representation, in various other ways, by producing sensations and that feeling of resistance, that feeling of power. See, all of that gives that sense of reality, and which we then may discover there is no ground to it, right? And then that will disorient us. So, yes, you have that sense of reality. Now, see that's the appearance, you see. Now, we say the appearance is what comes forth, really. And apparently comes forth, but actually it is being, in some sense, constructed, right? And but it also does come forth in the sense that if we just take this idea that perhaps there must be something beyond thought which is sending us information, which we say is through the senses and various other things, and the response of the whole system to that is to produce an appearance. Right? Now, what? What?
Biases and skews.
Yes, according to the past, right? And now we say we thought this establishes the distinction of appearance and reality, or appearance and essence, and the true being. And but that is a relative distinction. You see, we say underlying the appearance is the ground, which is its essence, its true being. And see, we have that all the time. You see, we could say if you go around a circular table, it really looks like an ellipse to the eye because it's being projected into an ellipse, right? Now, but then having gone around it quite often, or at least that it's not an ellipse because it's always changing. We all know that the thought that this is a circle would explain all those elliptical appearances, right? So we say it really is a circle, and we experience it as a circle, not as an ellipse. Then then you can go further and say this circle is apparently a solid, permanent, stable object. But when it's investigated in science, we find that it's made of atoms and movement, that these atoms can sort of move faster, and when the temperature goes up, it will dissolve into gas. And at one time, this whole thing must have been formed from gas. So then you say the essence is the atom, atomic molecular structure, and the circle is an appearance. In fact, it's only because we are abstracting, our eye itself abstracts, it doesn't pick up all that. And therefore, we take the circle as the appearance and the atoms as the essence, but then they begin to, an atom means it cannot be cut in Greek. So then not very long after atoms were demonstrated, then they were broken. Well, first into electrons, and then protons and nuclei, and then later neutrons, and then later, and so on. And then you would say these particles are the essence, and the atom is an appearance. And now they say these particles are made of quarks, and eventually they hope then to find the ultimate particles, which will explain everything. They say we will have the theory of everything, you see. But the atoms were thought to be the theory of everything too. But they say, well, no, in those days they were ignorant of the real situation. We know better, right?
So the theory is considered to be the most prime, basic thing, and we're trying to get reality or nature to fit into the theory.
Well, that's the only way you can think. You see, you have to see. This is a valid use of thought. Now, the word theory, again in Greek, it's the same root as theater. It means to view, right? To look at. You could say theory is a theater of the mind. Now, there are two ways. One view is to say theory is truth once it's proved. Or the other view is to say no, it's a kind of theater, which gives you insight. So just as in a theater, in a play, you have things going on, which are only appearances, but they give you an insight into something else.
But to hold to a theory and keep changing the perception of the natural order in order to try to fit into theory is one of the same things in science as what we do in psychology.
Well, yes, well, you see, as long as you know you're doing it, you see, I think when you are looking at a circle, a circular object, you actually experience it as a circular object. In order to deal with it, you have to experience it that way. You see, though it may not be a circular object, it's also not a set of ellipses and so on.
That word theory, I was just thinking that's really taking on a whole other meaning, that word theory. To theorize, when we say to theorize, we're theorizing. And yet, possibly since science has become what it is in our society, a theory is assumed by most of us as truth. Einstein's theory of relativity is...
Yeah, I think that there's a great deal, there's a deep urge to find a truth there, which, in a way seems right, but at the same time, to take it as an absolute truth. You see that there is truth in this process, I think, if it's done right. But if it's done with the wrong attitude, then it will not be true.
David, could you please fit fact into what you've been saying?
Yeah.
Is it
fact.
Is fact an abstraction of thought?
Well, it depends on how you want to do it. You see, the word fact means what has been made, you see, in Latin. It has been made by us, you see, by what we did. It's what has been done, what has been made. You see, the fact is what actually happens. And to a certain extent, the fact is made, you see, because we have to abstract. Every fact is abstracted from a vast context. But is it correct, you see? Is our abstraction correct? You see, that this we could also say about appearances. Appearances, we tend to, if you say it's only appearance, you tend to dismiss it. But it's only through appearances that we learn what might be behind them. And there may be correct appearances or incorrect appearances, right? The appearances which are incorrect are misleading, and if they are deceptive, then it's illusion, right?
But what I have trouble with is when people use the word fact it sounds rigid, it sounds firm, and I don't know where this is coming from.
No, you have to establish a fact, you see. Isn't that clear? Many facts are so obvious that you don't bother to establish them, but a fact should really be established, made stable. You see, the first appearance of the thing may not be a fact. You know, you say, I saw something, but it may not be so. Huh? And therefore, if you want to get a firm fact, it has to be established by various ways. By testing and so on, going around it. So you see, in the laboratory, a fact has to be established by reproducibility and by doing experiments in different ways and so on. Very often what appears to be a fact is not a fact. You see, they say they discovered a new particle, and sometimes later on they say, no, it was a mistake. Right? Because, you know, it was an appearance which suggested a new particle, but when you look at it more carefully, it's not so.
So can facts be called relative, or are some truly established?
Well, some are so well established that you can hardly doubt them, but, you know, like saying it's a fact that we're here sitting in the chair and so on. But it could be a hallucination. I mean, some people do have them. What? Yes. Let's see, how much? 5 minutes? Yes. Well, let's just stay on this point then and finish.
Psychologically speaking, in terms of, psychologically, would you say that fact and reality are synonymous terms, and as soon as a fact is something that's perceived, and as soon as we bring it into the area of thought, then it loses its factual identity?
Well, no, a fact maybe have to be interpreted, because you see, you may think something is a fact when it's not. You see people have said, I try to establish a crime. You see, what was the fact? You see, very often people draw conclusions as if they were perceptions and so on. They make mistakes. There are also wrong inferences. See, the fact contains various inferences.
Can you ever have a fact outside of thought?
With the help of thought. I think the way I would use the word fact, it's up to us to some extent to decide how to use these words, to try to do them coherently. Right? Now, the way I would use the word fact is that thought enters into establishing it, perception enters into it, and thought. Right? But the way it's commonly used is that a great deal of thought may be necessary to establish a fact, in some cases.
This may not be along the lines that we're talking about it now, but I remember reading Krishnamurti talks about remain with the fact. And then at another point, I think I remember him saying something like, remaining with the fact is the ending of the fact.
Well, that's psychologically. You see, if you remain with the fact of, the sun shining, or say that an eclipse occurred or something, it won't go, right?
It's not so clear.
What?
Yeah, I think this is just something about thinking. Okay, here's a chair.
Mm-hmm.
We'd say that's a fact. But if you remain with that, you'll lose the chair.
Well, that's psychological.
You'll still be sitting in it. It hasn't gone away. But the fact of chair as a thought process may be...
That may go.
That may go, and then there would be something else.
But the word fact also generally refers to, it's the thing to which the thought refers. You see, a fact which didn't refer to something wouldn't be taken as a fact. Right? And if it were merely, unless it's the fact about thought, which is also something. Now, you see, I think that the fact about thought is such that if you have incoherence or confusion in thought, then remaining with that will make it go. Because whenever you can clearly see that something is incoherent, it goes, doesn't it? As a thought process is not malicious, and it appears at times to be malicious, keeping you onward with thoughts that are stupid and so on. But we're trying to understand why that happens. But I say there is a possible thought process which is healthier and doesn't do that, right? That therefore, if you see, for example, this is a favorite example, if you thought you were going north when you're going south and you suddenly see it, you don't insist that you're going north. You see, it's a fact that you thought you were going south, but north is that in fact you were going the other way. And that is a fact that you will establish by seeing some inconsistency in what's happening between the thought that you're going north and what actually happens. You see.
Again, it seems to come back to this whole disposition to incoherence.
Yes.
That if one has the willingness to, face incoherence or contradiction or paradox.
Yeah, but you see that's what means staying with it means, doesn't it? You see, to stay with it sufficiently to see that it is not coherent, and to see deeply that it's not coherent. You see, you may see on a certain level it's not coherent, but there may be more memories which are impelling the thought onward anyway.
It's like tasting the soup. I mean, if we talk about the brain gets overloaded with all these thoughts that accumulate, or as we talk in the dialogue, I mean, all the things you contribute, that the way that thought becomes more self-regulating is in the tasting of the tasting of it, remaining with the fact, to actually taste.
Yeah, well, to be perceiving, to be either in sensory contact with it, or there's a kind of perception through the mind, which is to be sensitive to incoherence and to relationship and so on. That is.
Is it where we get into a bit of difficulty when we try and describe the self, because we try and treat the self as a fact, and we end up with self-image?
Yes, well, what can we establish the self as a fact? You see, that we may think that it has been. See, all these are attempts to establish the fact, identification, saying I'm this, I'm that, I'm that. And the fact won't stay fixed. You see, it won't stay stable, and you have to do it again and again. Yeah, I think we should. What?
Well, there's just a strange little experiment that a lot of people have done as children, and it seems stupid to think of it as an adult, but maybe it's not so stupid, and that is, if you don't just glance at yourself in the mirror, but if you stare at yourself in the mirror for a prolonged period of time, some very strange things happen.
What happens?
Well, your sense of who you are begins to weaken, and there's more there than you see on first glance, or something different from something more or different, or both. And
I see.
The sense of identification doesn't necessarily disappear, but it certainly goes through an alteration. And you see this often with children, but when you get older, it seems a bit...
Well, you don't do it. Huh? Yeah, but it's clear that if you look carefully at yourself, you will see something which... you will see your body or your expression or something which is different from the image that thought has projected, you see, from the representation.
Exactly that.
And that begins to shake the self-image. Right?
Exactly.
Yes. Maybe this whole process can continue because it's not really looked at. This whole business of thought deceiving itself, covering it up. So as long as things are sort of looked at with a glance, yes, it's still all there.
That's
stable.
right.
But when you do start to go into it and look at it, it may break up.
Yes, well, that means staying with it. See, one point is to say we've got to establish a fact and stay with it long enough to establish it. In science, that means, being careful of doing the experiments in different ways and so on, and different people doing it. And then but you see, it's like this. This would be an attempt through the senses to establish the fact of the self, but you find it doesn't, you see. See, this is the case when you have a wrong theory, then you find that the attempts to establish this fact fail. It gets confused.
Dr. Professor has the tendency to formulate a conclusion and then stay there in a static.
Yes.
And it likes that, has that tendency to formulate a conclusion and stay there comfortable with a conclusion.
Yes, well, it jumps to a conclusion. See, it doesn't come to a conclusion as a necessary chain of inference, but it jumps to a conclusion which will give a greater sense of pleasure or security or something. Yeah, so maybe we should stop now.